on October 18th, 2021, and we will have a roll call, please.
Okay, for the Historic Preservation Commission, Commissioner Keller.
Yes, here.
Commissioner Berg.
Here.
Commissioner Dunlap. Is he on? Okay. Chair Haley.
Here.
And then from Planning Commission, Commissioner Moline.
Here.
Commissioner Hefner.
Here.
Commissioner Deal.
Here.
Commissioner Howe.
Here.
Chair Bronis.
Here.
All right, so we're having I didn't mention that, we're having a joint meeting for the first part between Planning Commission and Historic Preservation. So it's good to have everyone with us. And then our agenda for this evening, do we have any amendments? Or do we have a move to approve? And this is just Historic Commission Preservation.
Seems like we have no amendments. I'll make a motion to approve tonight's agenda.
I'll second.
And all those in favor?
Yes.
Aye.
Oh, I see.
Did we get everyone's aye?
Aye.
Hi.
All right. All right, so our agenda is approved. And looking at our minutes from last month, September 20th, any changes for that meeting for our minutes? And if not, someone can make a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting, September 20th, 2021.
Do you want to second it, Keith?
Yeah, I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, those are approved. And any public comments that are not on our agenda this evening? And Leah Angstman is raising her hand. She's our Historic Commission liaison, Historical Commission. And Leah, we can, if you want to just state your name.
Yep, Leah Angstman, and I'm the Historical Commission liaison, as she said. And if anybody has any questions or anything for me, I'm here. That's all.
That's great. Thank you so much for representing the Historical Commission for us and being here this evening.
Yep.
All right, I don't see any other hands raised. Oh, and I actually forgot to go through do we need to go through our virtual meeting?
Not for this first agenda item. I think whatever
Okay.
you do prior
That's
to a
great.
public hearing, I can remind folks how to do stuff.
Okay.
Raise hand.
Okay, perfect. So our next item is discussion direction for the Old Town Overlay Diagnostic Report presentation. And this is why we have a joint meeting with the Planning Commission tonight. So we'll have our presentation and. Yeah.
Great. Well, I really want to thank everyone for attending the meeting.
Sorry, I think we
tonight.
want to recognize that Mr. Dunlap has arrived.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair Brownice.
We'll add that to the roll.
Great. Well, we really want to thank everyone for doing this joint meeting and welcoming Planning Commission to a night that's really in addition to their normal meetings. And so before we dive into the diagnostic report and a great presentation from our consultant team, I wanted to go through just a few things with Historic Preservation and Planning Commission, just given the fact that you all don't really deal with on a regular basis, kind of zoning regulations and terms. And then for Planning Commission, just how we're going to use a few terms as it comes to preservation principles. So you'll hear a lot of these in the presentation tonight, but I just wanted to go through a little bit of this as background just to set the stage before we dive in. And so again, tonight we're looking at the regulations that cover the Old Town neighborhood. And so the Old Town neighborhood does not include downtown, but it's shown in the map on the right there. And really kind of this carve out area is our downtown core. And the remainder is kind of our original residential neighborhoods of Louisville. primarily on the west side of the railroad tracks, but there are a few pockets on the east side. And so the Old Town Overlay regulations are the zoning regulations that govern what new build can happen and what additions can happen to existing structures. And so that's kind of what we're talking about tonight, about whether or not those should be amended. And if so, what are we trying to achieve? And so really, they'll dive into that a little bit more. But when we talk about terms, I just want to go through these really briefly. You're going to hear the term setback, and really that's just a regulation that covers a minimum or maximum distance from the structure to a property line. Height is pretty self-explanatory. Obviously, that's a height regulation that covers how tall buildings can be. Lot coverage is a regulation that covers the total footprint of building coverage on a lot. So that's just kind of the view from the air, looking down like in a plan view of kind of what the percentage of the lot, the total lot, can be covered by building. You're going to hear a term called floor area ratio, and basically that is a regulation that sets a maximum for the total above grade enclosed area. So that's more of like a massing, and it factors in first floor and second floor, things like that. So that's those are the difference between those terms. Lot coverage is just kind of plan view. Floor area ratio is more volume related. Some terms that we need to kind of clarify in the preservation world are the terms preservation and landmark. So preservation is more of a general term that covers protection, enhancement, and maintenance of historic resources. So that's just more of a goal, and that's when that can apply to both a structure and then overall to kind of a neighborhood character. So when we use the word preservation, it's different than when we use the term landmark. So landmark is kind of that designated structure. It's the highest protection. It's voluntary in Louisville. If a property owner selects landmarking, then we have a lot of regulations that potentially can come after that associated with landmark status. But it is a little different than how we use the term preservation. So just wanted to clarify that. And then finally, you're going to hear about lot size and lot width a lot. So within zoning, a lot of our regulations are a percentage of lot size. And so when we talk about why you're going to hear lot size so much, really sets the stage for how big a structure can be. All of our lot coverage and floor area ratios are a percentage of our overall lot size. And so that's why these are directly related, as well as the fact that our zoning regulations have a minimum lot size of 7,000 square feet, and we do not allow new subdivisions with lots smaller than that. So just wanted to clarify that. And lot width is similar. So that's basically, we do have some regulations in our zoning code that relate to lot width. And those are the setback regulations. And so that's why you're going to hear a conversation about lot width, is because it does impact the development potential on a lot. So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to turn it over to our consultants to pull up their presentation, and we'll kick off the formal presentation.
Good evening, everybody. Do you see the full screen?
Yes.
And do you hear my voice well?
Yeah.
Good. Lisa,
All right.
yeah.
Yep.
You want to?
Yeah, happy to kick off a couple of these first slides. So as described before, why are we looking at the Old Town Overlay? And so City Council added that to their 2021 work plan. They really wanted to dig in and understand more about what's changing in Old Town and how the community feels about that. So the regulations were last adopted, well, they were first adopted in 1995 with some really minor amendments through the years, most recently adopted in 2011. Since the Old Town Overlay was established, we've seen significant amounts of new development and redevelopment. And so we've heard some mixed reviews from the community. Some folks really like the changes, others have some concerns. But overall, we really wanted to understand whether or not the community and the boards and commissions that work in this area find that new development is complementing and not detracting from our historic small town character. And ultimately, we'd like to create a code that provides clear direction and guidance for development. So really, we want to take all of this initial feedback and see what we can do to make some changes and move in a new direction ultimately, we all know that, redevelopment is inevitable. And so we really want to set the stage around what we'd like to see moving forward. Next slide. You all know this a little more in depth, but what is Old Town? Old Town is it's a combination of Louisville's oldest residential subdivisions. You can see the image on your right. It's just a graphic showing kind of when all these subdivisions were platted. And really the historic fabric of our Old Town neighborhood represents Louisville's modest mining heritage. There is a mix of small vernacular structures with a few larger, more expensive homes. These are pretty well integrated throughout Old Town. But generally the oldest and smallest structures are closest to downtown, and kind of as you spread out away from downtown, the lot sizes tend to get larger. The structures tend to get a little bit larger, just depending on when they were built. Generally, the original part of Louisville was comprised of our immigrant communities. A lot of these properties developed kind of as compounds, providing multi-generational and workforce housing, as well as fairly unique to Louisville. Numerous structures were moved into Louisville following the closing of nearby mines. And so Historic Preservation Commission is, intimately familiar with that and the residential development. But for Planning Commission, we wanted to provide a little bit of overview on the neighborhood itself. Next slide. And then I'm going to talk through this one real quick too. So what have we done to get to this point? And staff and the consultant team have done a lot of work in order to get to the point where we're presenting to you tonight. The first thing we did was a pretty extensive public outreach that involved interviews with all of you, the Historic Preservation Commission and Planning Commission, and with our consultant team. In addition to that, the consultant team did a really deep dive into all of our base documents, like the comprehensive plan, Historic Preservation Master Plan, the context reports. So we have a lot of historic surveys for a lot of our residential properties in the neighborhood, in the Old Town neighborhood, as well as they did a lot of research in the Louisville Historian, which is a resource from our historical museum. And so they really got up to speed with the historic development of the city of Louisville. Additionally, the consultant team spent significant time in the Old Town neighborhood itself and doing a lot of physical measurements, GIS measurements, walking, and just absorbing the physical environment and putting a lot of that into the data that you're going to see in the maps and the presentation tonight, as well as what was in the diagnostic report. We also did public outreach that involved the community. And so through our Engage Louisville platform, we put out surveys, had the opportunity for neighbors to submit photos about things that they liked about the Old Town neighborhood, as well as just some general comments, particularly related to what about the community character did the neighborhood respond to, and what would they like to see more of? What are those critical elements that make Old Town the special place that it is? And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to our consultant team to take it from there.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm Korkut Onaran with Pelona Architects and Urbanists. And in our team, we have Peter J. Park, City Planning LLC, and Meta Urban Design. So 3 different firms came together, but we worked with City together. And we're really excited to go forward. So each community is different than the previous one. So in this particular case, we really identified 3 major subjects: the community character, the diversity, inclusion, and equity, and preservation. So our report has those 3 chapters, and for each chapter, we have what we heard from interviews and talking to people, what we observed in the community, and what the code says. So that's the way we organized our report, and that's the way the presentation is going to follow. Like Lisa was talking about, we did 3 major things. That is, talking to people, observing and surveying the physical environment, and understanding the code. So that kind of parallels to this. So in terms of the community character, we asked the question of, the comp plan mentions about the small town character, the unique character of the old town. We asked, where do you see this the most and what comprises that character? We heard, diverse was one of the most repeated adjectives. It's a very diverse environment, and that is a value for Old Town. It's friendly. We heard family friendly, lively, people walking around. And then in terms of the physical environment, we heard that, the buildings are close to the sidewalk and there are porches, and that creates neighborly interaction and a friendly environment. So that's in a nutshell what we heard. The Lafarge was mentioned, the park, around the park, again, because of the life, that was mentioned a lot. But in general, what we heard is that, it's diverse, and that diversity is what makes this very special place. And then what we observed is that diversity as well. We identified 4 prototypes, and these prototypes are not architectural styles. Just in terms of the building size and height, we thought these 4 prototypes are going to be important for us in the coding in the future, because what we feel is that, this neighborhood has a very interesting background. That is, because of the mining and background, it's very modest and simple and small cottages. There are a lot of small cottages. So that's what we have the type A, the single story old town cottage. And there are some small lots as well containing these particular cottages. We heard that in the back, going all the way to the mining days with the strikes and the Great Depression. Interestingly enough, this particular town was very self-sufficient. They created really limited amount of garbage. They grew their own food, even their own wine, and it was a pattern where you had compounds. That is to say, there are back buildings in not just the front, and workers whose family are in Italy would stay there, and then there would be some socialization, etc., so forth. Long story short, this particular neighborhood exceptionally had that particular type A single story old town cottage. And what our gut feeling tells us that you cannot apply the same set of rules that you apply to type A to a type D. That's why for us, these prototypes are important. I'll go through very quickly what they are. Single story old town cottage is kind of self-explanatory. The most important property of it is single story, and they are usually small and very modest. Type B is there's a second story, but second story is completely accommodated within the attic. So there's a big roof and second story goes to the attic, and sometimes there are dormers to provide light and such. Type C is 1.5 story cottage, meaning that there's a second story, but the plate height, that is to say the height at the edge of the building, is lower than your typical height. That's why we call this 1.5 story. And you accommodate some dormers to get light and usable space inside. But again, the second story is partly within the attic, and the height is lower. And finally, you have the full 2-story prototype. So we mapped this, and we realized that the single-story old town cottage and old town cottage with attic rooms are predominantly the building types. But what makes it interesting is actually the mix of these. That is to say, when we heard about that diversity, we observed that the mixture of these four prototypes is what makes the diverse buildings. It's about building size, building height. So this map basically is what makes this place very unique. And we're feeling that if we're talking about preserving the community character, more or less keeping that map intact in terms of proportions and the diversity, it should be the goal. So, and the third item, what the code says. And Peter, would you like to join in? Are you in the?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, good.
So Corkett gave us a good description of what we've observed. And again, if the intent of this project is to ensure that new development would complement, not detract from the neighborhood, we hope that it's obvious why our investigation and categorization of these building types, as we're calling them, becomes important. When we look at the code, the base code, there's a height limit of 27 feet, front yard setbacks of 20-foot minimum and 25-foot maximums, and a minimum lot area of 7,000 square feet, as Corkett mentioned earlier. While the overlay does provide consideration of lots smaller than 7,000 square feet, right? One of the sort of starting points that we think is problematic is, next slide, please, is when you actually look at what's on the ground, all the red lots here are what's called non-conforming. In other words, they don't meet the minimum 7,000 square foot lot area that your base zoning calls for. So it's a little bit of an unusual situation where the aspiration is to protect and maintain the character of this historic area, but the base zoning labels each of these properties as non-conforming, right? And so while the overlay works to give relief to, if you will, these non-conforming lots, as a starting point of regulation, it is a bit of a conflict because it fundamentally is not derived from the existing pattern of the neighborhood, right? Next slide. And with regard to setbacks, it's the same thing. In this case, all of the houses in red, or the buildings in red, don't meet the minimum 20-foot setback, right? So this happens in a lot of cities, in a lot of towns, where the new zoning code that came after the older parts of the city were built imagined a different city and didn't hold with much regard the existing city. But you like this part of your city, you like this neighborhood, right? And unfortunately, the code had something else in mind, right? So these are typically, when we do these kind of diagnoses, this happens in a lot of older neighborhoods because the codes that came into play and that are still in effect didn't pay quite as much attention to the existing patterns, which is exactly what your historical overlay is trying to celebrate. So this one-size-fits-all approach in your current zoning code is not really serving the Old Town area probably in the best way that it can.
Thanks. So equity, diversity, and inclusion, these terms are not emphasized in the comp plan, but we were told right in the beginning of the effort was that there's a new task force, and this equity, diversity, and inclusion is becoming a very important objective of the city, and it's going to be part of the comprehensive plan. So with that, we asked the question in the interviews, first, what do these terms mean to you? And then the second is that within the existing regulations, are there certain regulations that makes it hard to achieve these objectives? So what we heard is the property prices are going high and houses are getting more expensive and bigger and more luxurious. And that trend is a very visible trend in Old Town. And there were some, different opinions about why. One opinion said, this is a regional trend and it is what it is, and we'll need to follow it. And there was another opinion, well, maybe there are certain things in the code that really encourages this, and we should look at that. So we did, and this is what we observed. What you're seeing on the left is the percentile percentile table of the total floor area per lot. It's very close to building size, but considering that there may be, and there are in many lots, more than one structure, the building sizes are actually smaller than those numbers, because these are the total floor area above the ground on a lot. And what we realized that number is getting high. The table is showing today's numbers, and the median, as you can see, is 1334 square feet. That's pretty small, and that's why Old Town is actually pretty unique compared with other historic downtowns. But when we look at the 20-year periods, starting with 61, 80 goes a little bit higher, but 81 to 2000 goes to 1690, and last 20 years it's 2270. So it's significantly going higher and higher, which means to us, maybe there is a, this indicates a market trend. But next slide.
Could I just ask a question on that last slide before we move on? Is that okay?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Just with the median on the graph being 2270 and the median on the list to the left being 1334, does that mean it's trending down again? I'm just trying to figure out the difference between those two medians.
Which ones? Which years? Are you talking about the graph or the?
So to the far right on the graph, we're seeing a median of 2270, but in the table, which I think you said is current, we're seeing a median of 1334.
Yeah, what this means is that the table shows all the lots today in Old Town. Today, the median is 1334. What the graph shows, the medians of the 20 years in, all the houses built between 2001 and 2021, their median is 2270.
Gotcha. So the table is just overall, regardless of year.
Correct.
Okay, I'm with you. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no. Today, overall, it's still 1334, but if you focus just last 20 years and all the buildings, built in last 20 years, then you get to 2270. Okay. So, Peter, you can jump in here.
So that speaks to, right, and again, this is, Louisville is not unique in this phenomenon of single family houses getting bigger. While ironically, size of households is getting smaller, but that's what it is. But in terms of the overall size of the house, we also look at the parcels or the lots, right? And so like we said, in the RL and the RM zone districts, the minimum lot area is 7,000 square feet. Minimum lot width is 70 feet in the RL and 60 feet in the RM. So when we go to the map, we map these. Next slide. And what we see is, right, most of the lots are less than 7,000 square feet, right? In other words, 58% of the lots, the 10%, the 18%, the 30%, don't meet the minimum lot size, while 42% are greater than 7,000 square feet. A good number of the lots in the Old Town don't meet that minimum number. So what that means is, and I can't create a new lot, right, without it being 7,000 square feet, right? So in order to do development or to do infill development that looks like it fits with the neighborhood, the zoning doesn't allow you to make small houses on small lots. That would actually be consistent with the pattern, especially the oldest and older patterns of the smallest houses. It's illegal to do that, right? It's illegal to make small houses that could be more affordable, that could fit very well with the historic characteristics of the neighborhood. That is not allowed by the code, right? So really what the code says, because it uses what Lisa was describing as FAR, or floor area ratio. So basically floor area ratio is the total square footage in the building. Corkett was talking about that. The total square footage in the building relative to the size of the lot, right? And so what that basically creates is a situation where the more land you have, the bigger the building you can make, okay? So when we looked at what the code says, we modeled it and we studied a couple different situations. So here's a lot, which is actually fairly large. It's a 9,200 square foot lot. It's 75 feet wide. And in this case, we're showing a building, a one-story building at 1,300 square feet. And so you can see it kind of in the bird's eye view. And in the upper right, you can see it as if you were looking across the street. And you could see how this building might fit with the rest of the neighborhood. But the way the base zoning works, next slide, please, is that on that same lot, right, with the FAR of 0.35, I would be able to build 3,220 square feet. So here again, you can see the bird's eye view in the bottom. You can see in the top right, that house that is by right. And the zoning allows that by right. It's quite a volume of house. And if this were to happen, you know, these are the kind of situations that folks say, hey, that doesn't look like it fits with the neighborhood. The buildings across the street or next door are much smaller in scale. What's going on here? So that's fundamentally how the code works if I'm just doing a by right development. Now, one of the things in the overlay is it has two incentive structures. One that gives you more floor area to build. If you preserve the existing structure, you keep it, part of it. And if you commit to landmarking the structure, you get another bump in the total floor area, right? And this is, you know, this is a commonly used incentive to encourage some public good. It might be affordable housing, it might be preservation of structure, it might be a whole number of things, but usually that's the kind of incentive that a property owner would be able to get something in exchange for a public good. I think one of the things that our analysis is showing us is that your base zoning, the base floor area ratio is pretty high. And so a couple of things happen. You can do, and that's what this model shows, quite a lot of development that might not fit very comfortably in some situations without even preserving, without even landmarking your building, right? So let's talk about what happens when you do preservation.
So that's the next section. But before that, I'd like to emphasize the numbers here a little bit. You know, this is a very typical half block, and you know these lot sizes are very common. The 9,200 square feet, the 1/5 of all the lots in the old town are 9,200 or higher. So this particular situation, this size, is 1/5 of the all neighborhood. 3220 building size, only 2% of the all buildings are this big or higher. And that includes the churches and community buildings, et cetera, so forth. So it's a very foreign size, so to speak. Very, very rare. Now, if you imagine that potentially this code permits 1/5 of the lots to have a size of a building this size or higher, that's a problem for the future. This may not look for some eye not too overwhelming, but when you look at that number, that is to say, there are no buildings this size in the neighborhood, then it tells you there's something alarming.
And it also, and just one more thing about that is, Korka was talking about how houses are getting bigger in their total square footage. That 3220, as he said, rarely occurs, which indicates to us that the market isn't building, right? People aren't actually maxing out what they could do, right? The market is not actually building the amount of square footage I can do at the base level on a 9,200 square foot lot, right?
Peter, that's what I was going to ask. Of the 20% of the properties that are that size, how many have been redeveloped to kind of that
maximum
scale? Yeah.
That's a good question. We looked at the.
We could find out, but I don't know if we have that in this presentation.
And I guess the related question would be: do you have any sense of why they haven't been maxing out the square footage? The redevelopments that occurred, are they just trying to fit in better, or it's probably more subjective?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There is that, there is still scrutiny in the developments, and what we observed so far, even the really large buildings, we're talking about 2,400, 2,500, they try to fit in really well. But we usually look at the code as what ifs, that is to say, if the market comes in, that's going to be starting to a problem. And then we didn't get into this so far in this presentation, but all the bad examples people showed are actually relatively larger buildings. So we're starting to see some kind of dissatisfaction and voicing that dissatisfaction in terms of the sizes. It's not this big, but that's why we kind of look at it and then, okay, potentially this may happen. Now, the other part of it is that when we look at the whole region, this happened in Denver, this happened in Boulder, happening in Golden. That is, the sizes are getting bigger and bigger. And So that's why we kind of put this on the table, that this is an issue we're identifying.
Mhm.
Let's move on. Okay, preservation. We heard all, in terms of the preservation, what we heard, again, we asked the question of, are there any parts of this code that makes the preservation harder to achieve? And there were a lot of diversity of opinions. In general, we heard the preservation and landmark bonus system that we're going to talk about soon created some frustration, misunderstanding, and we heard a lot that it doesn't produce the kind of preservation results that is desirable. We heard about the building height, 27 feet, in certain cases, forcing people to do shallower roof pitches, even though in the overlay zone, there's a regulation about the, pitch being 612, and we are seeing some roofs that are really 712, 812, whereas the traditional neighborhood, you have steeper roofs, basically. We heard that. We heard about, setback 20. As there's a context-based setback rule in the code, but if the neighboring buildings are not, are not there to give reference, the setbacks are not consistent. And we heard a lot about the FAR and lot coverage creating confusion. And finally, the demolition stay is not, it just creates frustration, but sometimes it doesn't change the result. So those are the things we heard. And then when we observed, obviously there is this style difference. There are a lot of new buildings with special effects, whereas this whole neighborhood has something, an architectural character that is very modest and simple. It's because of the mining background, I guess. So we saw some of those, but then, there are some good examples at the same time. There are some awkward examples, we should say, when the buildings that are preserved on the lot are small and the added buildings are really large. That creates some awkward situations. And also we realized that there is the bonus system, and basically what the bonus system says, that if you preserve a building, then you can have some more density. But the way you preserve a building, there's a definition of that. And we realize that you can protect only a portion of a building and you still are eligible for the bonuses. And what you're seeing on the slide is that, the demolition is done and the first 10 feet of the building, a cottage, is kept, and a new building are going to be constructed at the back. So the building is under construction and there. But what we realized that, saving this part of the building, is that a really preservation? That's the kind of question we started to ask. This is exaggerated, especially if the preserved building is small, because, if you're a small cottage and then you're preserving a tiny little part of it, and is that the successful way of preserving a neighborhood? And we're going to go more into an analysis, but here is what the code says, the preservation bonuses. Do you want to go into this, Peter?
Sure. So let's just look at one line. Let's look at the bottom line in this chart. So if you have a lot that's greater than 7,000 square feet. And so what you see is when you look from the third column from the right, existing FAR, you get a floor area ratio of 0.35 or a maximum square footage of 2799. So 0.35 is your base zoning. If you preserve the structure, as Korkut was just describing, you get a bump to 0.4 in the FAR. And then if you designate or landmark your property, you get a further bump of 0.45. Okay. And so again, the earlier math that we were showing showed a result of a form of a building that could be pretty big under the base zoning, which grows bigger if you preserve part of the building, which grows potentially bigger if you commit to landmarking it, right? And so again, we modeled this to see what the effect could be. So here's our lot, again, 9,200 square foot lot, 75 feet wide. In the original building, let's say 1,300 square feet. And so here's what you could do if you preserve the structure. You get to the 0.45. You see the portion in the front that's preserved. Could you just toggle back? Right, so the first 10 feet or 25% of the lot of the existing structure is maintained. Could you just go back to the previous line? Yeah, so there's the original house. We preserved the front of it, and we added, utilizing our 0.4 FAR. So that's what you get, and that's part of the incentive. And then if I were to landmark, commit to landmarking the site, I get to a 0.45, and the building can get a little bit more, right? I get a little bit more space. So again, these were just these models that we did to study how does the math work in the existing code, in the incentive system, and how it's calibrated. And so for us, we think this is part of maybe a pretty significant part of what might need to get addressed in order to get the result of buildings that fit in. And again, part of our challenge here is one of the hallmarks of the neighborhood is its diversity, right? And so we're just trying to figure out, like, how do you encourage and promote that diversity, which is kind of part of its legacy. And I think that's where style and architecture could be pretty open, because that would in fact be a way to address that diversity. What this diagnostic is showing us, again, in the base calibrations of the code, is that the basic form and massing of what's potential under the current code for us raises questions of whether it really helps to maintain and preserve the character, not only of existing structures, but of the neighborhood also.
So this is a summary of what we identified so far. Again, community character, equity, diversity, inclusion, and preservation, those are the subjects. Community character, the code doesn't generate the existing character, one size fits all approach. So what we're trying to say is that if there are really, in terms of the scale and height and disposition, there are different prototypes, we need to address them separately in the code. We cannot just apply the same set of standards to a tiny little building and a two-story building. In terms of the equity, diversity, inclusion, the code encourages large lot building development, FAR lot coverage, but prohibits small lots. That is very important because, when the lot we're looking at 9,200, you cannot subdivide that into two lots and put two small buildings. It's not permitted. You cannot create a lot smaller than 7,000 square feet. But if you have two small lots and combine and reach 7,000, that's permitted. So the code allows one side and doesn't allow the other side. And that's the argument we need to make there. That is to say, we don't know if there's a market for small buildings. Actually, we almost know. I mean, if you look at the regional trends and everything, and the family sizes and the buying power, actually, there's a really high demand for small structures. But the code doesn't allow that. The code doesn't allow subdividing into smaller lots and providing smaller buildings. So that's one thing we see, especially in terms of inclusion and the diversity.
Just a quick question regarding that. Excuse me, or maybe not so quick. I think the concern would be that we would potentially then be incentive. So if we were to allow for the subdivision of larger lots, then we would almost be incentivizing tear down of the buildings that are already on those lots so that they could be subdivided into smaller lots and then new construction. Would that be a potentially unintended consequence?
Depends. I mean, our experience has been that, I mean, we're getting into the solution. That's the second part of all this rewrite. But in that solution, sometimes what we see is that actually, the geometry of the lots are such that there may be an opportunity to keep the existing building in a smaller lot and create a new lot for a new building. Yeah. So that's all about the geometry, and that's a whole other analysis we need to make. That is okay, if we were to do certain subdivision schemes, and it doesn't have to be that everybody has the same kind of frontage, but there are different geometries we need to explore. Maybe there's a way we can encourage, but first of all, we need to acknowledge the fact that that's a good effort, that is worthwhile going there. That's, that's why we're trying to identify the issue first and get there. And the other part of it is that, preservation is about preserving the character of the community, right? If this community has a lot of small buildings already and they are disappearing slowly, well, then we need to enable at the least the creation of new ones. So that's the kind of balance maybe there is, because, in Old Town history, there are really tiny little shacks that people lived, that's the heritage you're getting. So that's interesting. I mean, who knows what we're going to end up with, but but maybe there's a way to get there. So, and then the preservation, and the issue is lack of measures of better preservation. Like, there's a difference of opinion there as well. Some people say, yeah, maybe we're keeping the front of the building, but at the least, it's better than nothing. We're keeping, but then the other part of it is that, well, that's not the way to really preserve a neighborhood character. And so that's basically the issues. And then depending on these issues, we're kind of seeing that maybe there are some potential scope items start to appear. A form-based system that addresses the building type diversity, those 4 prototypes, mechanisms that enable small lot creation and small buildings. So, and again, important thing is that whatever these mechanisms are, should still preserve the character of the neighborhood. Mechanisms that enable affordable, attainable, and economically diverse housing choices. Revisit the preservation and landmark bonus system to come up with a better preservation measures, and revisit height, porch, lot coverage, and FAR definitions and regulations. So that's kind of the gist of what we came up with and what we identified. And next steps. Lisa, do you want to jump in?
Sure. So yeah, tonight we are very interested in hearing what you all have to say on this. We previously took this diagnostic report to an open house over Zoom on October 7th. We got a little feedback from there. Tonight we're here to hear from both of you, and then we're on to City Council once we feel like we've captured comments and recommendations from you all. And so Corkut, if you want to maybe stop sharing for a moment, and then so for feedback tonight, primarily, we just want to make sure that we hear from all of you. Did we capture the issues, right? So do you think we are covering our bases? And then do you feel like the potential next steps are the appropriate areas that we should study? And so as mentioned, Chair Brunice, I think will moderate questions, and we'll just, we'll pull up slides as needed. So if the slide is relevant to an answer, we'll go ahead and share that screen. And if not, we'll stop sharing while we're taking Q&A.
Fantastic. With that then, so I think the goal is just to have as free flowing a conversation for all of us as possible. I think we're probably, many of us have gotten better at doing that with Zoom over the years, but I think one of the tricks here is to try to open up your Zoom window so you can see as many people as possible as we kind of try to look for each other and just kind of wave hands as we work our way around the virtual room. And can we go with first names maybe this evening? Ben?
Thank you. I think it's a outstanding presentation and report. So amazingly detailed and great content. You know, it's a little bit new material for me, but it's just inventorying kind of where we are today is invaluable. A question I have, I guess, for the team is, I think if I understand correctly, like right now today, the code doesn't enable the creation of smaller lots. And let's say we had a magic wand and that changed. Do we think the market and the development community would, you know, come and build properties on smaller properties on smaller lots? Or is that kind of, you know, my view is it's maximum FAR and, you know, max out the lot would be the whatever the highest dollar price the developer could probably get. So just want to get your thoughts on that.
I'm happy to take a stab from what we see at the staff level, but then I'd like to hear from the consultant team too on what they're seeing more broadly in their experience. So I think from a staff level, I think we'd see both. I think we would continue to see property owners redevelop large, you know, either smaller lots or larger lots into kind of these larger properties. I mean, as we know, I think that's a market trend that we're seeing. You know, Louisville, downtown Louisville has become very popular, and we are seeing a lot of significant real estate redevelopment funds and come into the properties within our Old Town neighborhood. But so we know that that can happen, and that is happening. I think what we don't know is if we do allow small lots, how much demand we would see. I think anecdotally, given the number of questions we get internally as staff as to, hey, can I subdivide this lot and add another house on my lot? You know, say it's 9,000 square feet, not big enough to subdivide, but certainly room for another house, given, you know, if they have a small house on one side. We get that question fairly frequently, and those are due to a variety of reasons. You know, we do have a lot of multi-generational families in the Old Town neighborhood, and they really do like the idea of sister moving in next door, or brother, or parent, or son or daughter. And so that circumstance we can't allow given our current code. And so I would imagine we would definitely see some level of redevelopment for that.
It's just a process question. If somebody wanted to do that today, could they get a variance or get an approval for that? It's just a longer process.
No, that's a great question. So in 2017, we actually amended our code for subdivision regulations for properties that don't have a PUD. So basically for kind of any property that's subdividing into less than 6 lots, there's an underlying criteria in order to approve a variance that it would not result in more density than what the underlying zoning would allow. And so technically, no, even it's not so much that it would require a variance, it's that our code doesn't even allow that to be eligible for a variance. Mm-hmm. So yeah, curious to hear from the consultant team on that question as well.
Yeah. So, well, I Corky, you want to start?
Sure. I mean, there's a trend, regional trend, that there's a oversupply of really large houses and undersupply of smaller lots. Whereas the demand studies show that there is a demand for smaller lots, smaller structures if certain amenities are around, and Old Town would fit that because, you know, you're so close to downtown. And because of that, we see a lot of double ups. That is to say, you know, young couples uh, even unrelated people living together in a large house. In whole Denver metropolitan, the Front Range communities, that is increasing every day because there's a high demand for smaller and affordable, attainable, and very limited supply. So looking at that trend, we could jump into conclusion that there is a demand for smaller structures. Now, the big question is that how you arrange that, and how do you make? I mean, it's more of a geometry and regulation problem that we're going to deal with. There are a couple of other issues related with that. One is the tap fees. The regulations are such that you have multifamily and single family, and it doesn't matter how big of a house it is. It's you need to have a tap. So that kind of encourages the developers to max out the square footage, because if I'm paying one set of fees, I better put the most amount of square footage and get some out of that. In some communities, we were able to convince the public works to change that structure according to either, the square footage or the amount of consumption. And we may need to revisit that in this particular case as well, in Old Town, Louisville, if we were really gonna encourage and enable that particular market.
Yeah, at this point, I think for what we know so far, Ben, is that right? We know how your code works now, and that it doesn't enable it. It doesn't allow it. Right. The question of whether, if you build it, will they come? Would the development market respond? I think in proceeding, that's kind of what we're trying to get a sense of is, are you guys curious to know? I mean, at least, if you think that it would be okay, if it would be desirable to allow smaller houses on smaller lots in the Old Town area, which in fact was kind of the historic pattern, if that sounds like we should at least allow it, let's see what happens, right? Then we can investigate how to do that. And keep in mind, like whenever we're dealing with zoning, it's, well, what does the code allow? So that's one thing. In this case, we know it doesn't allow small lots. So do you want to allow small lots? Another level, one step up from that, is not only do we want to allow it, but we really like it, right? So we might actually talk about how do we incentivize that outcome. So that might, from a development and market response, to the extent that there is an incentive system that sweetens the deal. Don't know what that incentive is yet, but right. If it's something that is not just we're okay in allowing, we actually would really like to promote it, then we might look at, are there some incentive mechanisms? Then there's the next level, which is not only do we want to allow it and promote it, but we really, really love it. And in fact, it's the only thing that we want to have anymore, right? And so you compel it and you restrict it. So there's quite a spectrum there that's available to you. But I think at this point for us, it's just, the first question is, do you think the code not enabling it is a problem that in the rewrite should be addressed?
I definitely do, and I'll let others chime in. But the diversity and the smaller cottage style houses, I think, is a huge part of Old Town. So,
Dietrich, were you raising your hand?
Yeah, I was. And I'll try and be pretty brief, but I really couldn't agree more with sort of the description of what's going on and the diagnosis of what the issues are. I think the observation that you couldn't build many of the homes that are there now again today is really important. I think that's sort of the key to this work. And so I'm just really impressed with the report and your presentation. I think the hard work is probably still to come in figuring out how you do the code rewrites. And, you know, my thought on that is, and it's much easier to say this than to do it, is, you know, how do you sort of have these 4 prototypes and work around that model without pigeonholing and sort of forcing things into a box that maybe they don't fit in, and having it be more of a genetic approach that allows the kind of creative solutions, you know, that they were doing in 1898 to make the neighborhood work for families and relatives and minors and people doubling up and people with grandma living upstairs. And to me, that's what a really great neighborhood is like, is it allows the people to do what they want to do and be with their neighbors and be with their family. And so I'll be very curious to see what the next steps are and really looking forward to it.
How about members of the Historical Preservation Commission? Do you have any reactions there?
I think this was incredibly insightful, mainly because I think it helps explain why we've been so confused as to how things happen like they do on the code side. So when we see the massing, especially with new builds and that sort of thing, like it's just been really hard to understand, like how are these coming into the neighborhood, like what's generating this. And so I think just the fact that that there's a limit on how small you can have a building is like just wild to me. Like I'm just like, oh gosh, like we're fighting like an uphill battle. Like so I just think this is, in some ways I wish we'd done it like 10 years ago, had this whole discussion, but we wouldn't be where we are. We didn't need this discussion 10 years ago. But I think it's I'm so thankful that we're doing this now, because I think it is gonna really put us in a good place for 10 years from now. So I think this is just completely invaluable. And I just think it answers so many questions. It brings up a lot more questions also. And it is going to be a lot of work, I imagine, to get this kind of in line and making, as many people, there's going to be a lot of people that this does not please. And so just working through all that is going to be difficult, but I think it's really, really great. So.
Keith, did I see you raising your hand, or I didn't know if you
No,
were
but I wanted to.
flagging us down?
Yeah, let me just say real quickly, first of all, thank you for the report. I think it was very insightful, like Haley said, or Linda, I mean. And, being a father of 3, I kind of suspected this, but I couldn't put my finger on it. And I think there is a big demand for the younger generation of families coming along down the line that want smaller housing. They don't want the big, huge houses. I mean, I think that's going to be more rare as we get older. Plus, you have an aging population in the US, just like the rest of the world. And I think multi-generational families are going to become the norm again. So I think there is a demand from 2 spectrums there. So thank you for putting that together for us.
Jeff, I'm wondering if you remember, there's a lot that's kind of adjacent to Louisville Middle School that we permitted to subdivide the lot, actually, so they could put a second house on that lot. And right, the initial house was relatively modest in size, and the second house that got built there, I think, is also relatively modest. So I guess ultimately, though, one of the things we have to understand and be okay with is that with the potential for this smaller lot issue, where I still think it's very important we avoid the unintended consequence of then encouraging tear downs, that we're just allowing for increased density. Which in this setting, I think is both perfect and also something that the market demands is access to the downtown area. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'll also just second and third the comments about the report and where you're heading in your next steps. So really appreciated that. I guess I have maybe two thoughts. One is a question for you, consultant team, Peter and Korkut. Have you thought about like accessory dwelling units? And I hearken back to, I think it was some of the stuff in the Louisville history newsletter that Bridget works on that talked about batch homes, sort of like bachelor houses and stuff like that. And so I'm wondering if you've thought a little bit about ADUs or DADUs in some of the context of this.
Yeah, I mean, definitely we're going to propose that as a solution. And I understand that currently you can have structures, but you cannot have more than one residential unit on the lots of the RL zone. So that's something probably will come back to our discussions.
Okay.
And yeah, we're gonna, no solution is out of table right now. We need to explore everything, not just one ADU, maybe multiple ADUs. So those are all gonna, on the table, and we'll see what the feel is gonna be, from you and the council. And again, the big challenge, like some of you mentioned, is allowing that in a way that is not going to disturb the community character, and that's the challenge, and we'll get there.
Yeah.
But definitely ADUs are on the tool palette and should be explored. Yeah.
Okay, great, thanks. And then my last, I think this is more of a comment, because I think one of the things that makes Old Town and gives it some of its character is the narrow streets, or at least what I perceive. Maybe I'm wrong, but it sure seems like the street cross section is narrow than it is, for example, in my suburban neighborhood up here. And so clearly that's not something that's really going to be tackled in a zoning overlay kind of situation. At least I'm thinking it probably isn't, just because that, street widths and those kinds of things seem like they would be handled, I don't know, more at almost like a public works sort of level. But I'm wondering if hand in hand with the really great work that you guys are looking at in terms of all the stuff associated with the lots and the buildings, I wonder if there should be sort of a concomitant examination of kind of the streetscape side of things too. And just because I think that is, at least for me, my perception is that that's also an important part of Old Town. So anyway, if you have thoughts about that, or we can just leave it there. So.
Well, it is very important. I mean, the building setback and building presence on the street is part of the streetscape as well. So that definitely gets into the zoning. Like you said, the street cross section, and especially the city forestry, the street trees, those are not part of the zoning scope, but definitely it's important. And yeah, we should emphasize that.
So one of the things I'm wondering though is with current regulations, whether what they do allow is just too big. Right, we've said that what we love is part of this funkiness of big houses next to little bungalows next to something in between. So maybe on the large size of things, one of the reactions that we're hearing from people is that what we currently allow is just too big for this area. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the current regulation has the logic of bigger the lot, bigger the building.
Right, and the
But
logic.
It
the
doesn't
logic would
matter
remain,
what the
right?
lot is, certain buildings may be too big.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah, so the logic still holds to a degree, right? Maybe there's just a simple cap, or I don't know what you've seen elsewhere or how other people have dealt with the issue.
Yeah, I mean, we use caps, and it's
Yeah.
controversial, but in previous cases, we used caps. Again, that's kind of like the second phase. We'll get into there, but
Yeah.
definitely.
I think we'll have time to explore that. But right, again, it's right now your operating system is, there's no limit, right? You can assemble as much land, and the more land you assemble, the bigger the building can be, right? It's what we've clearly identified is that the other end of it, you can't do the smaller stuff that in fact is part of the existing historic pattern of the neighborhood, right? So how far you want to go in terms of allowing, compelling, restricting, right? I think there'll be time in the next phase to explore the implications of what, you know, how broad of a spectrum that you want to cover in that.
I was gonna say too that one of the tricky parts with preservation or landmarking for us too on the Historic Preservation Commission is just that the extra lot coverage is to some extent more valuable as the market continues to increase than our monetary incentives. So that's one of the hard things for us, is that is a really strong incentive. So that's just kind of throw that out there from our perspective.
Right.
So putting a cap, I don't think we necessarily would I don't think as a commission, this is mainly speaking for myself, I wouldn't have trouble with the cap, but I think it would take some of the just a little bit of the incentive away, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
just as a perspective from that.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, the cap wouldn't necessarily preclude incentives like that, though. So you could have a lower cap and still have those incentives to result in something that is something we want to preserve.
Right.
What
Yeah,
we
and I-
observed, what we observed is that those incentives, the extra lot coverage and FARs, if the lot is small, we're talking about 3,000, 4,000, there are a lot of those. What you're getting is just a tiny little room extra. So it's not really working like an incentive, especially for landmarking. The monetary help and if the owner is committed to preservation anyhow, so those are good incentives, but it starts to be significant for larger lots, but that's when the building gets too big. So then the question is that, are we really preserving the character of the neighborhood, So that's our observations so far.
And I think to circle back with that too is, I think as a commission, we would appreciate having some code to give us that enforcement to say that's too big. We don't have that right now.
Mm-hmm.
So, so I think that's what I'm explaining is like, we kind of have this conundrum of like, that's a huge part of our incentives, but we also, it does undermine what we're actually doing. So, yeah.
Gary.
Yeah, I think that was just a great analysis of the issues with size, and well done. You may want to at some point see how many of the large lots really would be available to subdividing, and different ways to subdivide them front and back versus just side to side. There may be things to do. But one big aspect that a lot of people mentioned in the comments about the Old Town was really the design of the structures, the aesthetics of houses. And that really hasn't been addressed much. I think in the current zoning code, the only design aspect that is even mentioned is the pitch of the roof. But in the discussions, there was a lot about things that are design aspects, porches. There's a lot that we look at in historic preservation about windows, conforming to the historic neighborhood in terms of materials. So a lot of those aspects maybe are yet to be covered, or do you see them as outside the scope of this analysis?
Well, now that you brought it up, we'll add that, because in the report we mentioned it, discussed a little bit the style. That is, we're saying that avoid, we're not doing the solutions yet, but what we observed is this is a very modest and simple architecture. And when you do special effects, too much ornamentation or certain elements like modern buildings use that are very alien to the neighborhood, then they really, stand up. So maybe we'll, thank you for mentioning this. We will ask that question as adding that as an issue. That is to say, should we address style? Should we go into detail of the character of the openings and the porch, etc., so forth? We'll put that as an item. And then again, this is what we're kind of hearing and identifying the issues. And that is a good question. Is that an issue? Should we work on that?
I think we've been fortunate to this point that the designs that our local architects have put forward are pleasing designs that are often congruent with the old town. There are some notable examples that aren't. Sometimes there are modern structures that actually, they do pretty well. Sometimes they don't, as in some of the examples you put in your presentation. But looking at more design aspects than just the pitch of the roof, and which implies the height of the structure, there are more things to look at there. One of the challenges we have in historic preservation, and it isn't just our own idea, it's part of the Department of the Interior guidelines, is that new additions to a historic structure need to be differentiated in some noticeable sense by the use of materials or shape or something from the existing structure. You could extend that to totally new structures that we'd like to have them compatible with the old town feel. There may be guidelines for what that really means. You don't want to identically copy an old structure, but there are design aspects you might want to include.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And you might remember the sort of 4 types that were identified can begin to be a kind of a starting point, right, for addressing some of these other design issues, Gary, that you're mentioning, right? And organizing it by the existing building. What type is it? Okay, so within these types, these are the important design features that are characteristic of those types.
Thanks.
Keaton, I think you were waving at one point there.
Yeah, thank you for that presentation. I think I'm in agreement with everybody that we want to allow small lots, but I guess to be the devil's advocate, I'm thinking in the back of my mind how that affects the historic preservation of the town, especially the downtown, Old Town overlay. And I think just to highlight some of the things that Chair Brown Eyes mentioned, I think population density may be something that's affected. And I think that can definitely change a historic view of the downtown. And obviously that changes traffic and congestion and other things. And hopefully this would maintain diversity. I guess what a couple other people said is if we take a larger lot and break it down into 2 half lots, I think we've seen that in some areas in Louisville. I guess I can think of some areas on McCaslin where there's been a larger lot broken down into 2 lots. And I think that also affects affordability. Initially, we think, oh, that will reduce, that will make it more affordable because you're dividing the land in half. But I think what we've seen is just the opposite, where you divide it in half and you see both parcels increase in value because of maybe a new small house or such built on it. So I'm not sure. I'm not convinced, at least, that this would improve affordability of downtown. And also regarding the ADU, I think that would also reduce affordability. And just to walk you through my train of thought, there is you're allowing people to add another structure, and typically ADUs can be used for rental purposes or another household living there. And of course, now that's another ability to afford income, and that would increase the value of that land. So I guess if we're trying to maintain affordability, if that's one of our goals, I guess we have to keep that in mind. And I think, as Commissioner Commissioner Diedrich said, I think the details are going to be really important to look at, and how we balance some of that affordability, but yet maintaining diversity. Obviously, the reason that this is happening, to build a bigger lot on a regular size, or bigger house on a regular size lot, is because the market demand is such that it's such a high value and low affordability to begin with, that people want to maximize their square footage on that lot. That's I think the biggest concern that we probably need to address, which may be out of our scope at this commission meeting, because those are market forces that are increasing the appraisal of land. So I guess the bottom line is, I think I wouldn't want to get in the way of allowing the small lots, but I think you need to be careful about preserving the historic value of the downtown area in this overlay.
As we give other people a chance to raise their hand if they wanted to talk, Lisa, maybe, do you have anything else in particular to kind of reorient our discussion that we were?
No, I think so far you all have been good. I think where we can give our consultant team some level of consensus, or, I mean, at this point, it's still early, so there doesn't necessarily need to be consensus around issues. All of this is going to be continuing to advance and going on to city council. But I think you're raising good issues, even if, I guess, circling back, if we don't have, consensus between you all, I do think you're raising good questions and good issues around maybe some pros and cons to some of these policy questions that we can continue to explore as staff and the consultant team as we're developing these new ideas. I think where we potentially don't hear consensus from you, we'll probably keep working kind of on both angles of these, and then bring more of that analysis to the code development so that you can get some of these questions answered in order to help you, I think, make the decisions move forward. So I'm going to just kind of leave it at that. I also would suggest, if now is a good time, but before we move on to the next agenda item, there are some public in attendance. So to see if any of the public has feedback. Go ahead, Corkett.
Before we move on, I have the question, Gary mentioned about the style. I'd like to hear from others as well. Is that something we should address?
My initial reaction to that is, in attempting to address that, we might incur the wrath of more people unintended on the political side of it all. And for what I would guess would be like, the relatively few examples of some brutalist home that somebody might throw up in the meantime. So, and maybe that would be a nice addition anyway. So I don't know, but I am curious what other people think. Dietrich? You're still muted, Dietrich. Oops, no. maybe,
Here-
there we go.
There I am. I was saying, I think in general, I agree with you, Steve. I think if we were gonna go that direction, my view would be that it should be closer to some form of guidelines, or sort of general design standards, but not overly prescriptive. There are certainly some examples in Old Town that I don't love. And, what comes to mind for me is sort of the multiple asymmetrical roof lines with gables facing the street, sort of really big dormers that look out of place. Anyway, I won't go into the fine details, but it does feel to me like I can picture some design elements that I don't love in Old Town, but at the same time, I would hate to see us go overly prescriptive in terms of requirements or anything like that.
Any other thoughts on that in particular regarding whether we want the consultants to focus time on that as a potential area of concern?
Right. I would tend to agree with what was just said. I think, for those of us on historic preservation, when we have houses where part of the historic house is being maintained and then there's an addition put on, it makes perfect sense to encourage like materials or require like materials, like windows or pitches or the siding. But I think where we would get a lot of pushback from the community, and in fact, the community, wants design choice downtown. So some guidelines, perhaps, or maybe more information giving to people as they're building and working with local builders to try to keep in the character and look of certain neighborhoods and structures there. But ultimately, I think people really, there is a lot of variety. We talk about diversity. One of the first things we brought up, diversity of types of houses downtown. And I think people really value even the ability to continue having diversity in the types of houses that we have.
Thank you. Yeah, and I agree too, that there's a certain charm to the funkiness too, right? Diversity of styles. Jeff?
I was gonna go and just divert for just 1 second. I just was curious if the historic preservation members feel that I was empathetic with the part of the presentation where the display of just preserving kind of that minimal frontage of a building and then kind of making the addition behind. I feel like in the presentation, there was a sense that that's not really doing much for historic preservation. That sentiment kind of resonates with me, but I wondered if that resonates with your committee. You guys see those obviously, we don't see those kinds of proposals before us, so.
Feels to me like the choices we have are to allow that sort of preservation with a massive add-on, or the alternative is a demolition,
Okay.
and they move forward. So
Okay.
That may not be our only choices, but it feels like it a lot of times.
Okay.
It's very much a compromise, I feel like, and very often, like the example they showed, I mean, that's a lot less of the house than we probably would have preferred, but it is this constant give and take and negotiation. So I would say that that's generally not our preference. Like we want as much of the original home as possible, but often with structural or their personal preference or a window in the wrong place or whatever, it can end up being a lot less, where, like I said, that addition that we add ends up kind of undermining the preservation.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, it can be a cool tool when the facade is on Main Street and you're preserving that facade, which is how the public relates to that building, yeah, but
Right.
different issue when it's residential.
Yeah.
Right. One other thing I wanted to throw out was I think the setback is really important too, because I think a lot of our, especially homes that are wanting to do a demolition kind of without even pursuing or asking questions about preservation, a lot of times they use the setback as kind of an excuse of like, it's not even following code, like where our setbacks are wrong. Like, so that sometimes can set the momentum for we're breaking all the rules anyway, so we might as well tear it down, you know? So I think taking, you know, just figuring out a setback that accommodates and puts all the existing homes up to code would be a much better solution than trying to fight that. And then also in that one example where the larger house was set way back also, you know, it would prevent that from happening too, because it does look very starkly different. And but that's where they have to do it because that's the code. So I think the setbacks are really important to address.
And to encourage the use of porches, perhaps by allowing them within the setback.
Right, exactly. Porches are a big deal too for the setback.
And even expanding on that, Steve, would we ever want to consider a requirement for certain porch sizes or porches based on FAR? That just seemed like a cool concept to try and continue.
And continuing with setbacks, and I'm not an expert on the setbacks or the code, but as we see, there's so many exceptions to those because a lot of the older structures are so close to the street. So it'd be maybe interesting to see with trying to have homes preserved or new construction to allow more flexibility in certain neighborhoods. Like there's quite a few neighborhoods, Lafarge comes to mind, where the majority of homes there, which a majority are historic, right, do come closer. So could new builds come closer to the street? You know, things like that, just kind of keep the character there and give people more flexibility.
We're going to open up to members of the Keaton. Go ahead. We'll have members of the public. If you want to just raise your hand, because I think there's a few people out there who are not on video at this point. Is that accurate, Lisa?
Yeah, so yeah, we'll keep an eye on the attendee list. If you're in the attendee, if you just hit the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen. But also we do have a number of our applicants for later agenda items in attendance tonight. So if any of you want to provide comment on what you're hearing on the discussion, please hit your raise hand button to chime in as well.
Keaton.
Yeah, just to answer Kirkut and Peter's question about what you would want to focus on. I think the FAR may be important. I think we all have an idea about what we think the small lots look like in downtown Louisville. I picture a small house with some open space around it or open yard around it. I guess you'd hate to see a lot divided in half and then have maybe less yard around that. So maybe that would be something to look at, would be what you'd recommend as an FAR for a small lot, or what it currently is for a small lot.
All right, again, for the public, raise hand button if you want to ask the consultant team a question or chime in with your thoughts on any of the discussion topics tonight. We'd love to hear from you.
Seeing none.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any. If I see anybody's hands raised.
There we go, Andy.
Perfect, okay.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Hi, everybody. Commissioners, everybody. It's good to see everybody. This is a fun meeting, very unusual.
That's double commissioners to you.
What's that?
That's double commissioners to you.
Double commissioners to me, yes. My name's Andy Johnson. I am the principal at DAJ Design at 922 A Main Street. I'm going to speak both as a professional, but also as an Old Town resident. I also live at 920 Lincoln Avenue. I was asked to be on the technical committee for this process, which is daunting and an honor at the same time. And I want to address a few things, and I want to say these things so that both sets of commissioners can hear it, because I think it's hugely valuable. First, starting with the historic preservation aspect. This is something that I know that the technical committee will be very interested to actually dig into with the consultants. We have two tracks, and I know everybody knows this, but it's really important that we distinguish the difference between historic preservation from a landmark perspective versus the preservation path. This is a little bit different than what other towns do across the Front Range. Landmarking follows the national standards for historic preservation, and there are very strict guidelines for that. Preservation does not. And this is a question for the historic preservation, the commissioners. This is a discussion that you need to have around the value of preservation versus landmark. I think that we all agree over the last year and a half, 2 years, that we probably need to tighten the screws down on our process of evaluation of landmarking. Maybe that's just my opinion, but that's sort of been the outcome of a lot of our discussions. The preservation path has been largely untested and has been sitting out there for quite a long time. And to get to Commissioner Moline's question that Chair Haley, I think you answered, and maybe Commissioner Dunlap, you mentioned, it's really a matter of, do you save that little bit of the home that has been in the neighborhood that may have that character? And I'm gonna call out that picture that you did list. That's a special home that otherwise would be gone, totally gone, and we would lose all of that history. Whereas with this, we get to preserve that aspect that was the essence of that home. Not the stuff behind it that was added on, but the essence. Keep that in mind. I think it's really important, and I think it's a really good discussion to start defining preservation as a path as we define it. Not the national standard, but how we define it. Okay, from a design, so I have my category. Sorry, I'm gonna go over 3 minutes, but I think this is important. Design, so you're right. The minute you start talking about design, you're all gonna say a lot of I statements, and that is not the point of zoning code. We wanna get away from I statements. These are not personal objectives. These are criteria by which we can agree to that meets the goals of the community. So our current Old Town overlay, for all of its kind of nuanceical faults, it does one thing really well. It does design without a design review committee. And the roof pitch rule, which the planning staff has heard me talk about how annoying that is from a design perspective, is brilliant in that it is so simple to be able to articulate our roofs. Not everybody does it well. Maybe I haven't done it well, but it's still a really good tool. That doesn't mean we have all these added design features that we need to address. Height is the other one. 27 feet is a very difficult height to meet with when we're building to contemporary building standards. So especially when we're talking about energy conservation, added insulation, we have taller heel heights. We have a whole lot of criteria that our past never addressed. So I do think that there are some aspects of our Old Town overlay that, good lessons. Setbacks. So setbacks and non-conforming issues, that's just the off-gassing of overlaying modern zoning in an old neighborhood. Fence lines don't match, buildings don't match. Sometimes the roads don't match. And that's just part of the deal. There's nothing really to address in setbacks except to provide better leniency. However, every town across America deals with this. We are not unique. Street width. This is a fun one. Pardon me for, I'm not going to pick on you, Commissioner Moline, but we actually have oddly wide streets in Old Town. We can park on both sides and we can still drive two-way. And that's a cool feature. And you're right, Jeff, we do need to preserve that. Not that it would ever change, because it does provide safe pathways for kids going to school, for people riding bikes around town, and gives us a different perspective than what we would normally have in a very narrow neighborhood. Like if you go into older neighborhoods of Denver, where it is really hard to go by car, and it's even more dangerous by bike. And you get a very different perspective of your cadence, I guess, along these streets are very different than if it were really narrow. And then the last point is size. So I want to caution the group and the consultant group, the commissioners and the consultants around size. This is going to be an arbitrary number. And this is going to be the hardest thing to identify of how do we determine what is the right size? Are we going to be the final arbiter of what we feel like is appropriate for what people build? And is that really what we want to do? We have a certain size. We all, I think have had pushback on, is it too big? These are I statements and they're really difficult to address. And I very much recognize that. And, these are things that I hope we get to dig into much more. I would like to propose that it's not a size problem, it's a perception problem. When you build 2-story right up to the front of a street, you have the perception of a really big house. And it could be a smaller home than the one next door. It's all about the massing, scale, and preserving the cadence of how we experience our streets, not size. A number is not going to solve this problem. So one of the things that I think the city of Denver did very well is that they identified zones within a property and size of home within a property. Now, I would actually take Denver's model and I would flip it. I would do the mirror image of it, smaller up front, bigger in the back. Those are things that, that's a personal opinion. Those aren't, things that I want to necessarily push for right now. But I think that it's really important that we identify why we're talking about size and focus on the perception of our architecture, not the number. That's it. Thank you.
Can I ask a question too? I think Andy does a great job of getting that perception. Like he has brought so many projects to us that are amazing and very sensitive. So Andy, is there a way that we could incorporate perception into code? Like, is that something we could articulate as code, or also our consultants?
Great question. Thank you for asking. Yeah, I absolutely do. I think it is. I think it is something that can be solved through zoning, and I think that we have some really great examples of communities near us that have done that. Again, I'm gonna pick on Denver. I think Denver did a brilliant job. It's not, that solution is not right for Louisville. Like I said, it could be the mirror image of what was done in some of the models of zoning for Denver that could be right for Louisville. But I think rather than looking at a property as a big rectangle, that we start slicing it up and we say, all right, this is how it makes sense. This is how we preserve that feeling of Louisville and not assign an arbitrary number. So, smaller in the front, bigger in the back, as an example. That's it.
All right, great discussion so far. Does the consultant team want to tackle that one too from your experience? I see Crooked, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, well, the size, the articulation, the massing, those are all solutions. And we're going to get into that phase. For the time being, our question is that, is size a problem? And, that's the kind of thing we're trying to identify. And our observation is that, well, sure enough, there's a size that is too big at that point. So, but are we going to put a cap? Are we going to look at the ways to really articulate? Those are all in the second phase for us, those are, again, we're not eliminating any options for the time being. We're really looking at all the options and trying to figure out what tool is the best to address this particular case.
All right, so I just want to throw out one other question. Do you feel like as a group, there's anything we missed? I know we've talked a lot about questions. Do you feel like there's anything that we missed in the report? I'll throw that out there.
I'll just go out and say, no, I didn't really feel like there was anything that was egregiously missed. Ben?
I was just going to mention if there's a way to try and get some input from the development community as to kind of the direction we're headed. And so we're not kind of too, I guess, idealistic in terms of what we think this will bring us.
That's a good question. And I need to apologize to Andy and the rest of the technical advisory group when I was talking about kind of what we've done so far. We did meet, we compiled a technical advisory committee that consists of Andy Johnson, Eric Hartroff, Peter Stewart, another local architect. Eric and Peter are both local architects. Dale Case, who's the planning director for Boulder County, and as well as Matt Berry, who's a structural engineer. And that technical advisory group also, they're all Old Town residents. And so that team certainly weighed in on the development of the diagnostic report and will weigh in a lot on the testing of new regulations, as well as bring their experience to using the code when we do that. But Commissioner Deal, your point's well taken for continued outreach to those that are on the development side.
Lisa, to reply to your question, if the report's missing anything, I guess when I was reading it and there was that graph with the red line since 2000, I think it was 2001, what the square footage has been in the recent developments. I guess I thought in the back of my mind, what is it for Colorado or what is it for the nation? What are those trends? Are we in line with those trends? Are we exceeding those? I was wondering about that.
Yeah, we can add that data. That's a good point. We do match generally. This is not a phenomenon specific to Louisville, but we can try and put a magnitude on it.
Anecdotally speaking, this is an unusual neighborhood with small structures. Many downtowns don't have this average or this median. You have a lot of small structures in this neighborhood.
Another question actually for background was, has there been a lot of assembling of properties going on with tear downs and then large buildings being built? If you could see if there's any data on that, it might help inform some of the discussion or some of the solutions.
Yeah, to my knowledge, I don't think it happens very frequently, but we can certainly try and quantify that.
And that was a question that I had. If a developer came in and bought two adjoining properties, they would by right be able to develop that at the FAR for the full 2 lots without any approvals required.
So they would need to subdivide it into 1 lot under our code. But there wouldn't be any technical reason why they couldn't do so. There's no maximum lot size. And so it really, because it would meet all the provisions of our code, we wouldn't have a basis for denial.
I mean, I'd be surprised if that hasn't happened numerous times, but.
Yeah, I don't know the numbers offhand.
Okay.
Okay.
Any other?
Consultants, do you have any other questions for the group while we have them here together?
No, thank you for your input. This was really helpful.
Thank you all. If any of you continue to go through the report this week, shoot over any questions or comments to planning staff. We'll get those over the consultant team and compiled into the main document. So we really appreciate all your time. All right, with that, Planning Commission, go enjoy the rest of your evening, what's left of it. We really appreciate your time. And consultant team, I'll check in with you all tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Are we good to start as historic?
Yep,
Okay.
you can move on as you wish. Yep.
Okay, do we need to go over the virtual meeting rules?
I think when we open up 9:32, if Amelia, you don't mind putting that up, then we can have it announced beforehand. Yep.
Okay, just making sure. All right. That was super interesting.
It was.
All right, so our next item is a public hearing for the demolition request and probable cause for 932 Main Street, and we'll have a presentation from staff.
Thank you, Chair Haley. And I actually have my first slide of my presentation as I pull it up is that electronic meeting procedures. So if you wanted to, as you typically do, read through those beforehand, we could do that.
Sure, my pleasure.
Thank you.
All right. Welcome to our meeting. All commissioners will be on video. Commissioners and staff will be asked to click raise hand when they wish to speak. The chair will call on individuals to speak. Commissioners and staff are asked to keep their microphones muted until called upon. Members of the public will be muted during presentations and commission discussion. Public participation. The public may join the meeting from computer or dial in by phone. All public members are muted upon entry. To make a comment during public comment segments, if you're on a computer, click the raise hand icon. It's either in the participant panel on the right side of your screen or in the control panel at the bottom of the Zoom screen. You may have to hover over that area to see it. If you're on phone, hit *9 to raise your hand. The chair will call on those with raised hands individually. You'll be unmuted when called upon. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Haley. And with that, I'll begin. So the next item after our Old Town presentation is 932 Main Street, which is a request to find probable cause for a landmark designation to allow for funding of a historic structure assessment for 932 Main Street and a request to demolish the existing structure. A subcommittee of the Historic Preservation Commission found there to be probable cause, so we brought it before you this evening with the full commission. Just for some context, the subject property is near the south corner, is near the corner of South and Main on the east side of Main Street, as indicated in the white shadowed box on the right-hand photo of the slide before you. And then just a general sort of context to the map of downtown. You can see it there on the left-hand picture starred right outside of, or right along Main Street. On the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see a photo of the subject property, which this photo was taken in 1992. And then the photo on the right-hand side would be current or present day conditions. And both of these would be basically the front facade. So those are facing east, or I'm sorry, facing west. Just a couple more pictures for context. So again, on the left-hand side of the screen, this is a picture taken looking south, but again, of the front facade. And then the photo on the right would be the rear elevation of the building there from the alley. This is just what we look for typically, this is what we look for in terms of criteria for landmarking. So you see landmarks must be at least 50 years, meet one or more criteria for architectural, social, or geographic significance, and then should meet one or more criteria for physical integrity. The principal structure at 932 Main was constructed about 1900, making it approximately 121 years old, meeting the 50 years eligibility requirement. Staff also finds that the structure meets the cultural and social heritage of the community, and there's probable cause to meet the criterion for social significance. Staff also finds that the style and integrity of the structure has probable cause to meet the criteria for architectural significance. The property has seen a number of interior and exterior alterations, but the overall form generally remains intact. And then for physical integrity, the structure at 932 Main is found in its original location and therefore meets the criteria for physical integrity. This slide just outlines how the finding of probable cause would meet goals 3 and 5 of the preservation master plan. And then also so those were many of the things we review for the probable cause, but to also review the aspects of the demolition request. The purpose of the demolition review is there before you, and we do review certain criteria as well. Those are listed in the 1 through 4 there. So the eligibility, number 1, for the criteria of the building for designation as an individual landmark, we just reviewed those age, significance, and integrity portions, so it does meet those aspects. For number 2, criteria number 2, the house is not located in any potential historic districts. For criteria number 3 before you, this is currently unknown other than the existing social history, which was included in the packet. There's no currently existing documentation regarding the specific condition of the property, but the applicant is also requesting a probable cause review for HSA funding, which would give us more information on the condition of the building. And then for review criteria number 4, this is also currently unknown, but again, if the Historic Preservation Commission did authorize the requested HSA through the probable cause, additional evaluation could occur to determine a scope of work and potential cost estimates to preserve the structure as well. So with that, staff does have 2 recommendations for the 2 requests. So staff recommends approval of a 120-day stay from the date of application, which would then expire on January 11th of 2022, giving the applicant time to research alternatives to demolition as well as pursue the historic structure assessment if approved by you all. And additionally, staff is recommending approval of that the HPC find there is probable cause for landmarking for 932 Main, making the property eligible for the cost of a historic structure assessment. And just to clarify a little bit, this house was originally a residential property, but has been operating as a commercial property for a number of years. So therefore, the maximum allotted to this would be 9,000 as opposed to 4,000. So the delineation between residential and commercial amounts. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen and I'm here for any questions. We also have Andy Johnson of DAJ Design here, and then Mary of the applicant group is here as well. And thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have questions for staff before we hear from the applicant? All right. And we'll hear from the applicant. And if you'll just state your name and address for the record.
Okay. Evening again. This is Andy Johnson with DAJ Design at 922 Main Street. I would also like to recognize that both Brian and Mary Kay are on. You'll see their names. They're the owner, two of the partners for the company that bought the property and are available for questions if any come up, and I know would be willing to speak. I actually would like to start, Kim, if you don't mind, by sharing your screen again. Normally when I get a social history from the museum, it usually involves more information, photos, and a little bit more context. However, this one was done quite a long time ago and was maybe a little more abbreviated than what I'm maybe used to getting particularly for a Main Street property that might have quite a bit of photos. So if you don't mind going to the aerial view, you guys get the benefit of watching me draw. Okay, so if we look at what was the original house, which is right here, with the porch, which is, we think, right there. Pretty much everything else around this house was added and was done so in various phases. We got to take a little field trip on Friday to go down to the crawl space, which is usually where everything is uncovered. You can hardly ever tell on some of these buildings, you know, looking at walls, looking at roof lines, sometimes it becomes clear, but everything is transparent when you get down into the crawl space or basement of these buildings. And so what happens with this building is that there is a very distinct line that happens right here. Now, it actually looks like it goes all the way out to this side. However, the crawl space is so inaccessible visibly on this side that it actually it's hard to tell. There may be actually a foundation right here that's blocking our view. And that would make sense because as you can see in the photos, that's the edge of the old home. Now, this was added on in various parts. And you can see this when you go down into the crawl space and look up. It's old, but it is entirely unrecognizable above the floor level. And then it looks like sometime maybe in the 80s that this entire portion, and I'll include this front part here, was added on. And I believe that was when Century 21 took over the property. And I believe at that same time that this back portion was also added on. And when you go look at the roof form, there was a very distinct ridge line that was there, probably ended with a gable form on this end, and it looks fairly symmetrical. However, when you look at the building from the east side now, it's very asymmetrical. So this slope goes basically mono pitch from this roof, from this ridge line, all the way down to this side. And then this part of the roof right here is essentially that old pitch of the roof that just got matched and brought out, all the way to the east side. When you're down in the crawl space, it is very clear that this front part here is the old part. Okay. Okay, let's go to the next slide, if you don't mind, Kim. Thank you. Okay, so as I mentioned, this south side of the building is no longer there. It is covered entirely by, and I'm going to go over to the right side here, by this portion of the building. And if you come look closely, there's a line that shows that line right there with a different foundation, different stucco texture, and it doesn't line up. So it's really clear that was added on, and it is modern. It is an entirely different construction type than what is shown here. Now, if you look at the windows of this home, and one of those older photos actually shows it a little bit better, it has more of that symmetrical presentation that we're used to seeing. Window, door. You can tell that all of that changed when it became a business. And so it's going to take a lot of uncovering and recreation to make that happen again. It's difficult to tell exactly what's going on with the columns in the front porch. Century 21 has sort of a almost like a Romanesque kind of presence in terms of their 80s architecture. And so I think that they added these sort of Doric wood preformed columns that are not old. They're kind of like a molded product that was wood, but it was kind of like a composite type thing. And you can see part of it because particularly that one column that I just highlighted, it's cracked. Like it got water damage, it failed, and you can see it kind of pulling apart and see the innards of it. And then of course they added this clay tile roof, which is sort of a surprising roof, given that this original roof would have been hugely understructured for that weight of material. So going from probably what was wood shake to asphalt here to clay tile, in this image, I would guess that this front porch is not original, but was old. Let's go to the next slide, if you don't mind. Actually, the next one, please. There's another one with an old photo of, there you go, perfect. Yeah, so a great example. It's kind of hard to tell if this, it almost doesn't look like the house, but actually it is, with the wood shingles. It shows, the windows, on either side of the front door. And I'm not sure what the date was. Kim, do you remember? Oh, 70s. Shows the front with the wall, with some sort of name right here. Anyway, I guess my point in going through all of this is that this home has had many, many lives, and it's really cool that this old building is still standing. However, there is so much of it that would be recreated and maybe not recreated well, that I'm concerned that if this were to become a historic preservation project, what are we accomplishing? And what are we trying to, are we trying to recreate this building, or which iteration of all of the different additions that may have happened, and at what time do we actually want to try to achieve? I do think that some of that could be uncovered. However, my biggest concern is that to do that, it's going to require destructive testing and investigation that I guess I just wonder if there's a value in doing that, and to what end. I'll be very curious to hear the discussion as we go forward, and as always, of course, I'm available for questions and comments.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? No. Okay. Do the owners want to say anything? You don't have to by any means, but I just wanted to make sure that you had the opportunity before we.
No, I think we're good. It was a long way to say no, we're good.
Yeah, no, that's great. I just want to make sure you have the opportunity. All right, and then I'm going to see if there's any public comment. I don't see any. So we can bring it back to discussion with the commission.
Would it be possible to put the slides back up and see the slide with the different staff recommendations? It'd be helpful for me to kind of parcel out what, it seems we're being asked to do several different things here.
Right.
So I want to figure out where to start with this one.
Right, for sure.
Absolutely. Let me just pull it up here for you. And it should be right there on the screen. Oops, nope, now it's not. Now it is again. There we go.
Yes. Thank you.
And so just to offer a little bit of clarification, so there's really two main requests you're looking at this evening. The first would be the first bullet point there listed, so the review of the demolition request. And so there would be a staff recommendation for a 120-day stay. And just as a reminder, that would include the kind of from the time of application received. And so this particular application was received on September 13th. And so the January 11th date is marked from that. And then your second review, your second item you'd be deliberating on would be the probable cause determination. So if you feel that it met those eligibility pieces, and if so, if you do believe so, it would be then able to have the money available for the HSA.
And so finding probable cause and doing the historic structure assessment would basically allow more exploration during that stay. Is that the purpose of having this attached?
Yes, exactly. And Andy, if you want to speak to that, I don't want to speak over you, but yes, that would be my understanding. Then they could see what, you can investigate further, see what some of the costs could be, see a little bit more in depth. And then also with the approval of the demolition, so you'd have the two. Yep.
Okay.
Is the 120 days required to do the perform an HSA, or could it be done in 90? You said the clock started rolling in September.
That's correct. Yep. And so I'll let Andy speak to that more. We felt that, having roughly 3 months, right, given the September, but I'll let Andy talk a little bit more, and that can be part of your decision.
It's 4 months. Anyway.
Gary, what question do you want me to answer?
The whether the 120 days is really necessary, or would 90 days accomplish the same thing?
I
As-
think, oh, sorry, go ahead, Chair Haley.
Well, no, I think he was just saying, is that enough time to have the HSA completed? Is that what you're asking, Gary?
No, the other way around,
no.
really. If it could be done more quickly, rather than stretching this to January.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that would be a fairly gracious time frame for a historic structure assessment.
Okay.
90 days would be perfectly adequate. Honestly, you know, for a commercial property with the work that we typically do, you know, a month is a minimum time frame. And that tends to be pushing it, just because we're trying to coordinate a number of consultants. So, you know, I would say that 60 days would be sort of a minimum time frame.
From now, yeah.
From now, yes, that's correct.
Okay.
So this property came up in a subcommittee, as Kim mentioned. And Andy and Mary Kay and Brian, I think I remember from that subcommittee, because I was on it, and correct me if I'm wrong, that at that point, the request was simply for demolition, I believe. So, you know, in attaching kind of these two requests here, I mean, it's great to see that you're willing to do an HSA to consider probable cause, you know, for landmarking. But ultimately, is what the owners want is to demolish this property?
Yes. And, you know, I think that was not a knee-jerk reaction. That was a really good look at the building. And having now talked to me really since May about this property, and we've had a lot of discussions about it. You know, I think that that the ownership group wants to come in and be really great neighbors, and I think also, you know, this is a really good example of a property that I think maybe subjectively we could say has outlived its lifetime. I think that it could continue as it is now. However, it will not support a second story. It will have substantial foundation remediation. It is almost all brick, clay tile. I mean, it's not even a structural foundation that an engineer could approve for really anything other than just keeping going as it is. I think that the historic architectural significance of this building is, and forgive me, again, this is my professional opinion, but I think that we're really stretching it to say that this has historic integrity. And, you know, as we have talked about in the last, 18 months, you know, I know for me professionally and what we do with historic preservation, I want us to do really good historic preservation projects. And I don't want to keep having to recreate history so much that we're without really good information. Like this building just doesn't have a lot of good documentation. Those photos are great. I have no idea what the south window sizes are. I have no idea what the front windows are. We may be able to tell that, but I think so much of the building actually has been removed. And if you remember our discussions around adding additions to historic buildings, you know, the whole goal is that if you were to remove it, you could put that building right back the way it was. And I think we've done that in varying degrees, maybe not so well. And I think, these are the things that I want us to talk about. Plus, we're a Main Street. We're not a residential downtown. And I question whether a residential building that we're recreating really makes sense for downtown. Or do we want to create, better mercantile opportunities as well as office situations? So there's sort of a whole planning aspect that may be outside of your purview to discuss tonight that I think honestly are all considerations. And this isn't like Yoga Junction. This isn't like Trivium. This isn't like some of the ones that we have done that I think have been really successful saving really special buildings that were already, special unto themselves.
I personally don't think this building has strong architectural integrity at all. I think like the general form, as far as it being like a small, obviously used to be a house, first part of it is still there. But and I think Andy's right as far as it would have to be rebuilt. Like it would have to be like the whole front of the building, like the doors would have to be recreated, the side windows have to be recreated. So yeah, I struggle with the architectural integrity on this one for sure. I think it's hard for me to lose that that's the place on Main Street as far as the size and form in general. But I don't know, just the architectural integrity I'm struggling with that a lot. So I'd be interested in what your thoughts are.
I agree with Chair Haley. I think it is it meets the 2 of the 3 criteria, but the third one, because so much work has been done to this building, but again, I also agree that it's the reason it was moved out of subcommittee into this full committee is because of its location right on Main Street in this commercial district. And while because it's downtown, it's the new owners would most likely like to put something that's more amenable to contemporary sort of commercial activity. And that's absolutely understandable and desirable in many ways for our community. It is sort of a loss historically to have a structure of that size, to have a structure of that size disappear. I think that's sort of my concern and why we're here tonight, kind of considering this property. And right, the picture that we showed had Yoga Junction, of course, off the street, but the empty lot. And now that lot has been developed, and there's there's the market in back, but the front is still open. We'll see what goes in there. It's so there's a lot of commercial opportunities there, sort of more kind of contemporary ones. But when push comes to shove, I don't know that it meets the criteria for that third one. So, again, sort of I liked Andy, I really like what you said in the last meeting with the planning commission there as well. Because it's not about what we prefer. It's are we meeting the criteria that's set forward in historic preservation requirements? And I don't know that it does, because so much work's been done on this house, and as we said, it would be sort of recreating history at this point, I think.
And I don't question that it should have been brought to the full commission, because I think you're absolutely right that it's on Main Street, it's a commercial. That's definitely not something I agree that it should have come to our full commission. I didn't want to by any means for anyone to feel like I didn't think that discussion was necessary, but yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with you, Commissioner Keller and Commissioner.
Yeah, if I can just weigh in real quick, I agree with you guys, and my thought is if everybody's leaning towards the demolition, is it really worth the HSA, spending money on the HSA? So I don't have any hard pressed feelings to save it as far as the residential building. So I'm kind of in line with what you other guys were saying. Other gals, sorry.
So it sounds like each of you is basically recommending that we approve a resolution for demolition and not approve the stay and the HSA.
That's what I would personally
Yeah,
lean towards.
it's painful to do that,
Mhm.
knowing how tough it is to save buildings, but this one looks a little more overwhelming, doesn't it?
Mhm. Yeah, and I mean, just not even being able to see the original building in it, except that there's a porch where the original it was. I mean, that's, I just, yeah. And I think on that front also, I don't even know if there's enough original material to even tell where they actually were. I mean, it'd still be guesswork even recreating it. And definitely the side, it would just be kind of measuring the picture and recreating a window, or how many windows were there originally. So yeah, I think this is a hard one to approve, but just because of its location and prominence on Main Street. But I don't think we have, definitely from a national standard, no one would keep this. Like no one would landmark this home from the national standards, so, or this building structure. So yeah.
Are you
Do you
ready to
agree?
introduce-
Do you agree with this, Gary?
Yes.
Okay.
Are you ready to introduce a resolution to
Sure.
approve the demolition?
Sure. Would you like to do that?
I would move that we approve the demolition of this property.
I would second that motion.
And we'll do a roll call, please.
And actually, if I just may, just to confirm as part of that, if there's any stay requirements that you're putting in with that, or if this would be, 0 days, just wanted to confirm that that's part of that.
All right. I don't think we're doing does anyone want to stay, recommend to stay?
I think the outcome will be the same. So
Right.
I can't see us changing our minds in terms of it meeting the criteria. And it seems like the owners are pretty, have a plan they'd like to go forward with. So I don't think there's much purpose in a stay.
Right. And I don't think that even if they decided to landmark and they wanted to recreate everything, I don't know that's a good use of our funds either. I don't know. I think there's better projects that it could be used on. So yeah, so I don't think there's
Thank
any
you.
point.
Just wanted to make sure it was part of
No,
the.
thank you
part of
for
the-
clarifying that. That's great.
Okay.
I think Commissioner Berg had second already. I couldn't remember.
Yep, I'll second that motion.
Okay, and then we were roll call. That's where we were.
Commissioner Dunlap,
Yes.
Commissioner Keller,
Yes.
Commissioner Berg,
Yes.
Chair Haley.
Yes. All right. Thank you for coming this evening, and we look forward to seeing what the new project is.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for the good discussion.
Thanks. Have a good evening. Unless you're on the next one, you might be on the next one. Huh?
I'll see you on the next one.
All right. So our next item is probable cause determination for 600 Lincoln Avenue and 621 Lincoln Avenue. And we'll have a staff presentation.
Thank you, Chair Haley. So the second item before you this evening is a probable cause, is a request to find probable cause for a landmark designation to allow funding for a historic structure assessment at 600 Lincoln Avenue. The subject property, as you can see outlined by the yellow dashed line on the right-hand side of your screen, there is on Lincoln Avenue, on the east side of Lincoln Avenue, just south of Pine Street and Lincoln Avenue. On the left-hand side of your screen is approximate location just marked in the overall map of Old Town, marked by the star there that you can see on the left. For a couple contextualizing photos, you can see on the left-hand side is a photo from circa 1948. So it was one of the Boulder County Assessor card photos. And then a photo of the facade on the right-hand side, current day on the right. A couple more current day photos for you. The left-hand side of the screen shows a photo showing both the front facade as well as the north elevation. And then the photo on the right-hand side would be taken from the alley, showing you just the rear of the property. Again, here's what we look for in terms of criteria for landmarking. So same, we look at the year, we look at the architectural, social, or geographic significance, as well as the criteria for physical integrity. So we'll get into those now. 600 Lincoln Avenue was constructed in circa 1904, pardon me, making it 117 years old. So far above the 50-year threshold there for age. For architectural, social, or geographic, for social significance, Steph finds that the structure exemplifies the cultural and social heritage of the community, and there is probable cause to meet the criterion for social significance through deep historic ties to the Petron family, as well as the home's ties to Louisville's strong immigrant heritage through particularly that family as well. Steph also finds that the style and integrity of the structure have probable cause to meet the criteria for architectural significance. It retains a number of character-defining features and ornamentation that some other folk Victorian examples have lost over time. And the decorative shingling detailed in the front gable and the verge board detailing is distinctive and are important character-defining features now, as well as to many other 1900s era homes. Additionally, and overall, Steph finds probable cause that the structure meets the criteria for physical integrity and that the structure is found in its original location, and it meets a number of aspects of historic integrity, including location, setting, materials, and association. And again, here before you is just showing you how finding a probable cause would meet goals 3 and 5 of the Preservation Master Plan. And therefore, staff recommends that the HPC find that there's probable cause for landmarking of 600 Lincoln Avenue, and HPC by motion may approve or deny the finding of probable cause, which would make the property eligible for the cost of a historic structure assessment up to $4,000. And with that, I'm here for any questions. And again, we have Andy of DHA here as well, and then I believe I see Jesse Thompson would be here as well to take questions too.
All right, are there any questions for staff? All right, and we will hear from the applicant.
Okay. This is Andy at DAJ Design again, Andy Johnson at DAJ Design. I think you have my address by now. Yes, Jesse and Kyle Thompson are also on the Zoom call. I did let them know that I'll be speaking for the project, and I think I'll keep this brief as I promised to Kim that I would. Chair Haley, like you said, let's focus on the good projects. Well, here's a great one. This one right off the shelf is just, with architectural integrity alone, I think really says it all. I would like to again compliment staff, both for this project and the Main Street property. The information that we're able to find is tremendous, and I didn't have a lot to work on with the Main Street property, but Kim was able to find all the information that was needed, and same for this project. It's just really great. We're lucky. There are going to be a few questions that you have. So there have been additions to the home. I think that the HSA will uncover the age and how those were done. The front porch is enclosed, and it looks different from the older photos that we've seen, where you see the open porch with the brackets, kind of the more more typical kind of Louisville front porch. And I do believe, after having visited this home, I do believe that enclosure is quite old. But those are things that we'll get to uncover. So more than happy to answer any questions, but I have a feeling that I may not need to.
Does anyone have any questions for Andy? Yeah, I feel like this is a high note for us after the previous one, so definitely probably not as much discussion either. Let me check and see if there's any members of the public. Did the owners want to speak? Andy, you said they were good with you just talking tonight.
They have presenter status, so if Jesse or Kyle would like to, I'm sure they will. But I did let them know that I'd be happy to
Okay.
present.
And by no means is anyone obligated to talk.
Oh, we're here, Linda. We just wanted to say thank you guys for looking at it. We're really excited. But that's it. You guys are doing great.
Thank you. All right. So I don't see any hands raised in the public either. So we'll bring it back for discussion with the commission.
I think this house is just a great example of a really well maintained historic home in this neighborhood. And there's quite a few homes, I think, in this neighborhood like this, and of course around Louisville. And the criteria for integrity, like was shown by staff in the slideshow, there's several of them, including the shingling, and the gables, and several other things. So it's just a little darling house, and it's great that the owners want to preserve it. So be eager to give them, approval for an HSA.
Yeah, I think the age is definitely 50 years or older. The integrity is great, even with the additions. From what we can see, it looks like they're sensitive and don't take away from anything. And then definitely the social history. So Keith and Gary, do you have any?
It looks like the kind of property we would want to see preserved, so.
Yeah, I agree with all of you guys. I think it's a great property. I'd love to see it become historic.
All right. So if anyone would like to make a motion that we agree that this is would be probable cause and would be eligible for the HSA, we can start there.
I'll make a motion for finding probable cause for historic structure assessment for 600 Lincoln Avenue.
A second.
And we'll do a roll call, please.
Commissioner Keller,
Yes.
Commissioner Berg,
Yes.
Commissioner Dunlap,
Yes.
Chair Haley.
Yes. All right, so we'll get the HSA going on that, and then we can take the next steps. And then the second one is 621 Lincoln. Is that the right address?
That's correct, it is. All right. Thank you all. So for the third item before you this evening, we have a request to find probable cause for a landmark designation to allow for funding of a historic structure assessment for 621 Lincoln Avenue. And again, just for some context, you can see the subject property is a photo or included in the screenshot on the right-hand side of your screen as outlined by the yellow dashed line. Also on Lincoln Avenue, just a little bit further north, closer to the corner of Pine Street and Lincoln Avenue, and this time situated on the west side of the street. Again, for general context, again, within the overall Old Town, you can see on the left-hand side with the map, the star indicates roughly where the subject property is located. For some picture context, these two would be both historic photos. The one on the left is from about 1950, a Boulder County assessor photo. The property you see, or I should say the structure you see, is not the property. It's the kind of lot is being ready to be built in this photo. And you could see that by 1957, because the property was built in 1956. You can see when the Boulder County Assessor came back, that's the photo you see on the right-hand side. So completed with the lot being ready on the left and then completed on the right. So here's some current day conditions, one photo a little bit closer than the other, but both of the front facade. So you can see, some of the detailing and the general condition that it's in currently. These are both current photos. And then again, here's what we look at in terms of criteria for landmarking. So same as before, we'll look at the age. We'll also look at if the criteria of architectural, social, and or geographic significance, and then of course, physical integrity. So to get into those, the principal structure at 621 Lincoln Avenue was constructed in 1956, making it 65 years old, and so it does meet the 50-year threshold. And then on the right-hand side, this is another photo in the interim. It's a little bit after 1950, so I apologize, I miswrote it in my caption. So it's kind of the middle ground between those other two historic photos you saw, so during construction. For other criteria, staff finds that the style and integrity of the structure has probable cause to meet the criteria for architectural significance, as 621 Lincoln is an excellent example of the minimal ranch style that was popularized in post-World War II American suburbs in particular. For social significance, staff finds that the structure does meet cultural and social heritage of the community and has probable cause to meet the social significance criterion, as the original owners have ties to Louisville coal mining heritage, as well as this home's ties to Louisville's strong immigrant heritage. Overall, staff finds that the structure meets the criteria for physical integrity as it remains in its original location, and staff finds that all 7 aspects of integrity, location, setting, design, materials, workmanship, feeling, and association are continued to be met currently. Again, here, this would just be how the 2 goals and objectives of the preservation plan are met, that if a finding of probable cause would meet these 2 goals and objectives. And so therefore, staff recommends that the HPC find that there is probable cause for landmarking of 621 Lincoln Avenue, and therefore HPC may by motion approve or deny the finding of probable cause, which would make the property eligible for the cost of a historic structure assessment up to $4,000. With that, I'm here for any questions, and we also have Carolyn Godwin, I believe I'm saying that right, here to answer questions as well.
All right. And did you want to say anything to us as the applicant? Just state your name and address. You're not obligated to, just if you'd like to.
Yeah, I would love to. So Caroline Godwin, 621 Lincoln Avenue, and just want to first thank you for having me on and being able to connect with you. So when we first put the bid on the home, we actually, we were definitely not the highest, but the family wanted to preserve the home and go to another family, especially with the husband crafting the home and making it. So the family originally lived in the garage and then moved in once it was completed into this main home. And so some of the great findings that we've had is like the little check marks on the lower in the basement of like the kids growing up, and we hope to maintain that. But we were so honored that they did choose us to kind of preserve and hope that we can do the same. And I grew up in Louisville. My dad actually taught at LMS for 35 years. The gymnasium's named after him. So my 2 sisters live in Old Town Louisville. So we definitely have kept it, kind of local, but just hope that I can continue to preserve a wonderful house in a great neighborhood. So thank you for the consideration.
That's awesome. Thank you. It's always good I think those personal connections too are a huge part of what makes preservation meaningful too. So just having that family connection and understanding like the family history behind it is really important. So thanks for appreciating that, because that doesn't always happen. So, and that's great that you have your own history here too. So that's really neat.
Yeah.
Did anyone have any questions for the applicant? All right. And I'll check and see if there's anyone in the public that has a comment. And I don't see any. So bring it back for discussion with the commission. So this one definitely also is 50 years or older, has great architectural integrity. I think this one's important too, because it's because of the time, it's more of the, oh, what do they specifically call it? The
Is it minimal ranch?
minimal ranch, right? So it just shows that the historic progression of Louisville, and so I think that also adds to the diversity of our downtown, and so and how that played out architecturally in our homes. So I think it has definitely very strong architectural integrity and context, just as far as the historical context of the time. And then also great social history. So I think all the pieces are definitely there.
I think one thing that's been clear from today's discussion too is how important the small houses are in the aggregation of our community, how they all work together. So I think it's a good candidate to be preserved.
Yeah, and we don't, truly, I don't feel like there are a whole lot of homes from this era. They're more dispersed, throughout the neighborhoods, and more of them, I think, have a different style ranch from that era. Not many of these minimalist ones. So it is really unique. And we heard, we started the meeting tonight with the consultants, just hearing how much, again, people in Louisville really value that diversity of homes and architectural styles and eras. So yeah, so I think it definitely meets all the criteria, and it's nice to see it.
I think it also sets a good example that this is a style that's landmarkable. Like I think this is like anything 1950s and on is very threatened as far as demolition. And so I think just showing like we actually value this as a community, and these are important homes that show our history. I think that's really important. So thank you for doing that too, being that example. Would anyone like to make a motion for us?
I would move that we approve this property at 621 Lincoln for probable cause.
And is this probable?
For historic HSA, right?
Yeah, probable cause for HSA.
Right. Yep.
Okay. Do you want me to restate that?
I don't think so. I was just making sure.
Okay. Yeah.
No.
I'll second the motion.
All right. We'll have a roll call, please.
Commissioner Berg,
Yes.
Commissioner Dunlap,
Yes.
Commissioner Keller,
Yes.
Chair Haley.
Yes. And so staff will be in touch with you too, as far as the HSA and just the procedures and everything. And we look forward to hearing more from you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're so welcome. Thanks for both of you, but both of our applicants. Thanks for sticking. This is like the longest meeting for you to have to wait for this. So we apologize for that, but thanks for bearing with us. Hopefully you learned some more about our program. All right.
Thank you.
All right, so we are done with our public hearings. We have items from staff.
Thank you, Chair Haley. I'll try to keep these next two brief. So from the agenda, you can see there's a staff update memo, which would, is our typical updates, and then our next meeting updates. And then we'll also have the review of recommended inclusions for the 2022 City Council work plan. So I'll try to move through those as quickly as we kind of can, since I know it's later. So thank you. Can everyone see that okay? I shared the right screen. Good. So for subcommittee updates, we didn't have any demolition subcommittee reviews other than the one we saw, of course, before us this evening in the past month, so 932 Main. And then just as an update, which would have been as part of the staff memo, 501 Jefferson, which you saw at your last meeting for landmarking and a grant, is going before City Council tomorrow night. So just so you know there. And then for other subcommittee, the alteration certificate subcommittee did receive a review for 809 Main, which you'll see on the screen on the slide. And so as an update, the subcommittee did review that request, and they did release it with the two bullet point rationales there before you. So the proposed materials they were proposing are similar to the original materials, and the request was to widen the door on roughly 2 inches overall. And then so the transom would have been widened to meet. And then the door, as you can sort of see, and there's a step up to it. And so the proposal for this alteration subcommittee certificate request was also to have the door meet the floor. So that was kind of at grade, right? Not, it was flat, so they wouldn't have to step up. So so that second bullet point, the widening and alteration would not have an effect on the overall historic integrity of the landmark structure. So that one was released at subcommittee. And then for general review of dates, we do have 2 upcoming meetings. So at this time, staff doesn't have any indication that we will be going back in person. So I'll update you as I know, but just keep in mind these will very likely be virtual. And so November we'll have our meeting on the 15th, and then December is the 20th. So we have those 2 coming up. And then the last thing I have before you this evening would be the 2022 City Council Work Plan. So I did send that, separately, so you had hopefully a little more time to review it. But generally, to give it to some context of what we be looking at this evening, is this is separate from our typical work plan review. We'll still do that in the early 2022 as far as what we would like to do specifically as the Historic Preservation Commission for our work plan. But it's important to kind of look at all of it in context to see if there's anything in very particular that you would like to have be a part of the City Council work plan, which is what they're looking at that and gathering that now. And so at this time, as you can see before you, kind of sort of from staff's point of view, what we'd have is the ones on the left would be either 2021 carryover items or new items that would be on our plan specifically. So we'll review those more in depth in the winter or in the new year. But particularly from what we saw, or what was in that memo, we'd just be looking at the Old Town Overlay Zone District and any updates that would come out of the consultant group and their review and their diagnostic and their report. So at this time, staff would feel that that would be most appropriate to go on the 2022 City Council work plan from us, but certainly we can kind of talk about this in general. Again, these are all our sort of work plans that are in our work plan items that are in the mix. And again, we'd still have that opportunity for our specific items. We're just kind of thinking about, is this what we'd like to go to City Council? So if that doesn't make sense, or if any more clarification needed, I'm happy to do that. I'm also happy to share the memo if that's helpful. I have that up and ready to go. But with that, I'll leave it to discussion and then here for any questions.
Kim, I don't recall a prior discussion of historic grant amounts or grant requirements. Is that a follow-on from the study that's going on?
Oh, that's
Or did I miss those? I was gone from the August meeting. Were those amounts discussed then?
To my knowledge, those were from earlier in the 2021 kind of work plan items. I don't know if we kind of focused on them or got to look at them as in depth, but they would have been included at the beginning of this past year. And so technically they'd be carryover items for 2022 for us.
Yeah. Well, they make sense probably in light of the current study.
And that's a good point. If I may continue for just a moment as well, what you might not see on here would be the conservation easement kind of study or review of that sort of rhetoric or that language in the code. And it's not that I forgot it. It's just since that would be inherently part of the Old Town, overlay study, it would be kind of automatically part of that review. So I didn't want you to think I forgot it. It's just kind of part of that anyway, since the larger piece is being studied.
Mm-hmm. I think I agree that Old Town Overlay is definitely where we want to spend most of our time with City Council. If we have them in a room, like that's, I think especially after tonight's presentation and just looking through their work, like that's where our time needs to be spent. And I think it does cover, like you said, so many other pieces that we work on and issues that we have. Like getting this taken care of will help us and guide us in our own workings of the other items. So I definitely think that's a good use of our time. How long is our City Council meeting? Like an hour? It's not even an hour, is it?
That's a good question. I might have Director Ritchie talk to that, just since I haven't been a part of that before.
Right. I have, but I can't remember.
That's a really good question. It's been a couple of years since we've done these regular dinner check-ins with City Council, but you're right. My recollection is it's roughly hour and a half. It's usually the time of the meeting. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think even as we as we talk through that, there'll be other things from our list that we can, we'll just naturally, if we have clarification or whatever, that kind of just covers a good broad scope of what we need to take care of. So. Anyone else have varying thoughts, or do we agree with that? Okay. All right.
Kim, you did mention Director Ritchie. Is that an announcement?
Interim Director Ritchie. So as we
I
kind of
see.
navigate some of those staff changes after City Manager Balser stepping down, so there's some interim move ups. And so Rob is currently the interim assistant city manager. And so we have interim Director Ritchie with us. So yep, so that'll be going on as they kind of work through that hiring process. But yes.
We'll all go back in line in probably February. So this is definitely interim, but it's fun in the meantime. You will get Rob back.
That's great. I don't want to interrupt, but I also don't want to belabor. If that sounds good and looks like
Yeah.
we have some consensus, I think that's what we can move forward. So appreciate you all taking the time to talk about that. I know it's been a long night. So, but that's all I have. I'll stop sharing my screen as well. I should have done that before. My apologies. And thank you so much.
Great. Yep. And Lisa, you did a really great job at the planning co-meeting. So
Thank you. And I want to express my appreciation to this group too. I think you guys are very thoughtful, and you asked good questions tonight during the Old Town overlay discussion. And I do think you're going to be very critically guiding this next this update through the preservation lens. And one thing I didn't mention, I think, Gary, one thought, I didn't mention it with the broader group, but Gary, your question around design guidelines, I do think there's potential to kind of split that off into more of a requirement within the preservation program for maybe properties that are landmarking or properties that are using the preservation bonus. You could put more of the design standards around that that's separate from the broader regulations for the whole neighborhood.
Yeah, clearly there is some need there. If every small house that we allow to be created is a Frank Lloyd Wright style, I don't think people are going to be enamored with the historic character of our neighborhood. So, but on the other hand, that they make a point that if you try to define design guidelines too much, you're going to offend people. But do you feel like we need to have any more discussion among ourselves as the HPC for input into the zoning effort?
I can say you all will get more visits to this. So before anything gets adopted, we'll come back to you to make sure that we're on the right track with the solutions. So just to set that expectation too, not to get in front of your answer, but just as far as next steps.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's good.
And if any of you do have thoughts that, you didn't get tonight, just email us. We'll get those included sooner rather than later.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
And I guess I don't know all the ins and outs of planning, but do they ever see our meetings or like kind of see? I just think it'd be interesting too for some of the houses that have been trickier.
Yeah.
Like for them to actually just at least read through the minutes, or if they want to listen to it or whatever, just to see the back and forth. And
yeah, that's a really good point. If they do, they don't share that with us. It's not something, that they're required to do, but I do think there is merit to that. I can work with Kim and we can maybe think of a few examples to send to the commission for minutes and video links, to just understand more about what all you do. They don't generally have that background. So I think that'd be great.
Right. And likewise, like we don't really have their background. So I think like tonight, kind of all looking at the same thing at the same time, we're like, and just understanding that we're all seeing it very different, like some from a development side, and we're like, whoa, like that's not how we look at it at all. Like,
right.
So that's just an interesting perspective. So I think, and it might be good for us to have little snippets of some of their meetings. I don't know, but
I can certainly send you a few examples of some of
yeah.
their dialogue, just so you get a sense of how they operate and the things they're thinking of. Yeah, that I can do both for both groups.
Yeah.
Just if interested, that's certainly not complicated to do. So
yeah, just
and
kind of brings
yeah.
us to a middle ground, a little more of an understanding. So anyway.
Good
And
idea.
if it's helpful, we could share our PowerPoints too. Just as we make PowerPoints, we make them for those, and that's a truncated, kind of view of the report itself. But it's kind of a nice way to distill some of the information, right? Just like these that we give you. So that could be another option as well.
Right.
Definitely.
Yeah, and maybe just like even the PowerPoints, and then like the commission discussion that happened, like just copy pasting that part of the minutes, where they don't have to read through all the back and all the different presentations, but just seeing what our discussion was.
Yeah.
And for some of those really tricky properties, I think would just be helpful. So anyway,
I do think they would learn a lot from that.
All right. Was that all the staff items? Okay. All right. Any updates from commission members? No. Okay.
That's nice.
Would someone like to make a motion to adjourn?
I would move to adjourn.
I'll second that.
All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Yes.
Aye.
Thank
Great
you
job
all.
tonight, guys. Thanks
Good
for sticking
night.
with us.
Okay.
Good night.
Congratulations. Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.